Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the cobbled streets of 18th century Paris, where the shadows stretch long and the concept of sleep is just a little different. The year might be 1750, but the night feels weirdly familiar and also completely upside down. You drift through the Marais district, past shuttered shop fronts, and the occasional flicker of a lantern behind frosty window panes. The air is damp with the smell of river fog, horses, and someone roasting chestnuts somewhere down the block. The bells of Notre Dame have long stopped tolling. The city isn't silent, but it's not awake either. Somewhere in this sleepy twilight, something strange is happening. Half the city is asleep, and the other half is about to wake up. And here's the kicker. You probably wouldn't survive this sleep schedule. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's so unfamiliar to your caffeinated, screen-lit, single sleep cycle modern body. In 18th century Paris, people didn't just sleep once and call it a night. They slept in two chunks, with a pocket of eerie, quiet wakefulness in between. That was normal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking in slippers across a creaky wooden floor. A small fire still crackles in the hearth. Outside, someone's carriage clatters past, but indoors, it's nearly bedtime. Not lights out for the whole night, bedtime. Just the first installment. First sleep, as they call it, begins soon after sundown. And in Paris, in the 1700s, that's somewhere between 8 and 9 p.m., depending on the season and your social standing. You blow out the last candle. Maybe your room is shared with family. Maybe you've tucked into a curtained bed, designed to block drafts. And you sleep for about 4 hours. Then, quite naturally, your eyes flutter open. It's around midnight. You feel, oddly, refreshed, not groggy, not disoriented. In fact, you're kind of alert. This is where the story gets strange, because you're not alone. Across the city, behind thick stone walls and tucked into narrow garrets, thousands of other Parisians are doing the exact same thing, waking up in the middle of the night. Not from insomnia, not from stress, but because that's just how people used to sleep. And here's the even weirder part. They expected to wake up. Diaries and letters from this time talk about first sleep and second sleep, like it's no big deal. Doctors referenced it. Priests planned sermons around it. Parents told bedtime stories that assumed you'd be up for a while in the middle of the night. One Parisian tailor wrote that he'd often rise at midnight, stir the fire, stretch a bit, maybe check the window for signs of thieves, and then, here's the kicker, head out to chat with his neighbor if the lights were still on. Can you imagine knocking on your neighbor's door at 2 a.m. today? You'd probably be met with a ring cam and a police report. Historians still argue whether this practice was purely biological, cultural, or something in between. Was it a product of dim candlelight and short winter days? Or did humans actually evolve to sleep in two parts? Once before midnight, and again in the early hours. Back in your Parisian bed. You're not panicked about being awake. In fact, you might get up, stoke the embers, use the chamber pot, and maybe nibble on a leftover tart or chunk of bread. The dog might lift his head lazily from beside the fire, then sigh and drift back to sleep. No rush, no anxiety. You've got another good 3 or 4 hours coming up soon. Oh, and did I mention the stars? If you're lucky enough to have a tiny window view, maybe a crooked rooftop escape, you'll see more stars than we could dream of now. Paris isn't flooded with electric light yet. The night sky stretches clear and ink black. There's Orion. There's the moon, high and still. And there's you, just awake, listening to the heartbeat of a city that's never entirely asleep. Meanwhile, down the street, a midwife readies her tools. Babies like to arrive in the second sleep window. Nature, it seems, has its own schedule. A baker might be mixing dough already, and the monks at a nearby monastery, they've just begun their matins prayers, their voices echoing through the stone chapel like whispers to the sky. This first glimpse into 18th century slumber feels like stepping through a portal. Everything is quieter, softer, but somehow more awake in its own strange way. You, in your thin linen nightshirt, stretched out on a straw-stuffed mattress, are just one of thousands resetting their internal clocks. Without alarm bells, melatonin, or TikTok, and yet even now, there's a flicker of something familiar. That in-between state. You've probably felt it too. That rare moment when you wake at 3 a.m. not with panic, but with a calm clarity. As if your body remembered something ancient. Something Parisian, perhaps. You shift slightly under a thick woolen blanket, the kind that itches just a little until your body warms the space beneath it. The mattress sags slightly in the middle, stuffed with straw and resting on a rope lattice that needs tightening every so often. This is the tail end of the 1700s, and you're just beginning what's known as your first sleep. The shutters are closed tight, blocking out what little moonlight the cloudy Parisian sky might offer. No glowing clocks, no buzzing phone on the nightstand. Just you, your slowing breath, and the fading flicker of embers in the hearth. First sleep usually starts an hour or so after sunset. For most Parisians, that's between 8 and 9 p.m., give or take the season or their daily labor. The body eases into it naturally. Melatonin kicks in with the dark. There's no jarring interruption of LD screens or 24-hour news cycles. People aren't worried about emails they forgot to send or what's trending on social media. Your thoughts float somewhere between memory and dream as your breathing deepens and your muscles slacken. This early part of the night was thought to be the most restorative. Physicians of the time, armed with leeches and Latin, believed first sleep to be tied to digestion, recovery, and humoral balance. Basically, if you didn't get your first sleep, you were bound for melancholia, or worse. Quacks and real doctors alike advised patients with anxiety or irritability to ensure they didn't miss their early night rest. It was even common to prescribe specific diets or bedtime rituals to help people drift into it. What's especially fascinating is how regular this routine was. Whether you were an aristocrat in a silk nightgown or a washerwoman in a freezing garret, your first sleep was a sacred part of your daily rhythm. You worked all day, ate a heavy supper, then slipped beneath covers as the sky turned dark. That period after dinner and before bed, surprisingly social. People read by candlelight, sewed, told stories, or gossiped. Some even invited neighbors over for hot drinks before heading off to sleep. But first sleep didn't mean the whole household was out cold. There were layers to this nightly routine. Servants might be finishing chores. Bakers could already be prepping dough. In wealthier homes, someone might be tidying the parlor or emptying chamber pots. But the core family, especially children and the elderly, were generally bundled up and snoozing. Still, interruptions were common. Rats in the walls, carts rattling by on cobbled streets, church bells marking the hour. And if you lived near the sign, the cold mist could roll in suddenly, chilling your bones through the cracks in the wood. But perhaps the most constant, familiar part of this era's sleep was how unhurried it all felt. There was no pressure to maximize rest in an 8-hour block. No fitful tossing and turning, anxious about not falling asleep fast enough. You had all night, literally, and first sleep was just part of it. There's an odd comfort in this staggered approach. Your body dips into deep, slow wave rest, the kind that restores your immune system, and knits up muscle tears from lifting sacks of flour or hand scrubbing linen. It's that heavy, limb-numbing sleep that arrives when candles gutter out and your brain starts sorting through what just happened today, the argument in the market, the flirtatious glance from a neighbor, the suspicious price of eggs. All of it folds into dreamscapes as your breathing slows. Historians still argue whether this phase was a biological necessity or a social invention. Some suggest that artificial light eventually erased our natural, bimodal sleep patterns. Others think that even without electricity, this too, part sleep was a cultural product shaped by how communities lived, worked, and interacted with darkness. Either way, the rhythm of first sleep was so consistent across records that it became embedded in everything from folk tales to medical journals. One apothecary's manual from 1773 advised patients to avoid hearty discourse or news right before first sleep, as it might excite undue mental fervor. In other words, no doom scrolling in bed. Meanwhile, the city around you continues to breathe. The sign laps quietly against mossy quays. A pair of lovers argues in hushed tones behind a shuttered wine shop. Somewhere, a drunkard sings off key, then stumbles into an alley to sleep it off. But in your little room, all is still. The fire flickers once more, then fades. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some Parisians believed that first sleep dreams were prophetic, cleaner, and more true than those after the midnight wakefulness. Midwives swore by interpreting them. Merchants consulted dream books before making big deals. Even Voltaire reportedly believed that his most lucid ideas came to him just before waking from that first stretch of slumber. You, of course, aren't thinking about any of this. You're dreaming of simpler things, fresh bread, a sunny day, the warm press of someone's hand. You're wrapped in a time when sleep wasn't a battleground, but a cycle, soft, slow, and deeply human. And soon enough, you'll stir. The room will still be dark, but your eyes will blink open on their own. No alarms. No panic. Just the inky pause between one rest and the next. Your eyes open slowly. No rush, no startle. Just a calm drift upward from that first heavy sleep. It's quiet, eerily quiet. You lie still for a moment, unsure whether you've woken from a dream or into one. The fire has gone cold, casting long, ash-colored shadows across the wooden floor. Outside, the city sleeps, or pretends to. This is the midnight interlude, and in 18th century Paris, it's just as normal as breakfast. You sit up, stretching. The air nips at your skin, and you quickly tug the blanket over your shoulders like a makeshift cloak. You're not surprised to be awake. You expected this. Everyone does. This natural break between first sleep and second sleep is part of the nightly ritual. People don't talk about insomnia. They talk about the watch or the waking. And what you do with it, well, that's where things get interesting. You pad across the floor. The boards creak just enough to remind you you're not entirely alone. In many households, at least one other person is up too. Maybe by candlelight, maybe just sitting quietly, waiting for sleep to return. If you're lucky, someone's left a jug of water or a crust of bread on the table. This quiet hour is not one of productivity, but of presence. No rush, no demands. Just you and the pause. Think of it like history's version of doom scrolling, but with less existential dread and more tea. Some people pray. That's a big one. There's something about midnight that lends itself to whispered Our Fathers and Ave Marias. Others meditate, or whatever the 18th century version of meditation looked like. Quiet reflection, counting beads, watching the fire. It's a moment of intimacy with the self, or with a quiet God. Then there are the lovers. Midnight is famously romantic, isn't it? For Parisians, this waking period was considered one of the best times for marital intimacy. Physicians of the day actually recommended it. They believed the body was better suited for love in this middle stretch, when one was rested, but not yet burdened by the day ahead. If that sounds suspiciously like an 18th century excuse for a post-nap cuddle session, it kind of was. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some folk customs suggested that spirits walked most freely during this waking hour, not in a terrifying horror movie way, but more in the keep your feet under the blanket and don't stare too long at dark corners kind of way. Stories were shared about ancestors visiting with dreams about sudden inspirations, or strange smells that floated through locked rooms. Was it real? Historians still argue whether this was a mass hallucination caused by poor ventilation and lead-based paint, or just the fertile imagination of a people unafraid of mystery. You're still seated by the window now. Maybe you've pulled aside a curtain just a crack. The street below is dusted in frost. A cat picks its way across the rooftops. Somewhere down by the sign you hear faint laughter. Not drunken. Not wild. Just gentle. Like someone telling a joke to a friend who stayed too long after supper. People did things during these hours. Simple things. Repaired torn sleeves. Sharpened knives. Read scripture or poetry by the dim flame of a candle stub. Some wrote letters. Because really, when else do you get quiet and clarity in a house of 6? In wealthier homes, this wakeful spell might include tea or cocoa. Exotic and expensive, sure, but slowly making their way into bourgeois habits. The truly posh, they might have nibbled sugar, dusted nuts or tiny biscuits from silver trays. Midnight snacks, it seems, are timeless. And not everyone stayed in bed, either. Some ventured out. It sounds wild, but yes, Parisians sometimes went for little walks. The idea of a midnight stroll wasn't entirely absurd. Guards patrolled certain areas. Lanterns hung from important buildings. You'd take your own light, bundled in a cloak, and maybe call on a friend who was also known to rise. Think of it as 1700s social networking, with more frostbite and less sarcasm. The streets, though, remained mostly hushed. Candles flickered in windows. A few, dogs barked. Somewhere, a bell tolled once, soft and hollow, marking the hour. It wasn't haunting. Just a reminder that time still moved, even in the spaces between sleep. And all the while, your body isn't anxious. It's not buzzing with insomnia's electric dread. This waking is gentle, expected, even welcomed. In fact, many people believed it was the best part of the day, or night, rather. A sacred time when thoughts untangle themselves, and the soul finds a kind of balance the noisy daytime doesn't allow. You return to your bed eventually. Maybe you shared a quiet word with someone else who stirred. Maybe you jotted a thought in the margins of a book, or stoked the fire just enough to keep the room from freezing. And maybe, probably, you're ready to lie down again. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because your eyes grow heavy, your limbs warm once more, and the silence begins to hum in a lower key. You shift under the covers. The straw rustles slightly. And the next wave of sleep, deeper this time, dreamier, waits just behind your eyes. The fire's glow fades to a faint red as you settle back into bed. But you're not quite ready to sleep again. Not just yet. That's the strange beauty of this middle night interlude. It gives you time. Not to stress or ruminate like we often do in the blue, lit haze of modern 3 a.m. wakefulness, but to simply be. And while you're content to wrap yourself in your blanket cocoon, others across Paris are making use of these mysterious midnight hours in surprisingly creative and occasionally bizarre ways. Let's start with the classics. Prayer, as we've said, was common. But it wasn't just reciting rote lines in the dark. Many people believed this interlude was the perfect moment to have a private chat with the divine. Less performance, more confession. If you'd been up to no good during the day, now was your chance to whisper your regrets to heaven and hope the silence forgave you. For more secular souls, there were other midnight rituals. Letter writing, especially in the merchant and literary classes, was practically a sport. Imagine candlelight flickering, quill scratching, ink blotting. No email inbox here, just careful, often romantic musings. One shoemaker in Montmartre reportedly penned love notes to his future wife every night during their courtship, only during his wakeful hours between sleeps. The letters survive, and they are unbelievably sappy. Then there were the people who took this time for conversation. Family members, partners, roommates, whoever you shared your space with. They'd lean in, voices low, and talk. Not the daily logistics. No. Did you feed the goat? Chatter, but stories, gossip, daydreams. Pillow talk truly. This was when secrets were shared, jokes whispered, and hearts softened. And if you lived alone, you might hum, or pace, or read aloud to yourself. In wealthier homes, you might even have had access to books or pamphlets, though printing costs still made these luxury items. Religious texts were common. So were cookbooks. Strangely enough, nothing like reading about tripe stew by flickering light to lull you into second sleep. Here's a wonderfully odd tidbit. Some people believe this middle night hour was ideal for digestion and bodily regularity.
Yep.
Certain medical guides encourage people to relieve themselves during this time, claiming it helped balance the humors and ensured restful second sleep. So yes, if you were wandering past a latrine at 1 a.m., you weren't alone. You were being medically virtuous. And of course, there were lovers. We touched on this, but it bears repeating Night intimacy wasn't just culturally sanctioned. It was almost prescribed. One Parisian physician wrote that lovemaking during this hour led to more cheerful children and calmer dreams. No idea if the data backs that up, but the sentiment is peak 18th century optimism. This interlude was also a time for subtle resistance. Think about it, in a world where much of life was controlled by the church, the state, the clock tower. These quiet hours belong to you. No overseer watching, no boss barking orders, no customers to please, just dark time and choice. Women especially may have found a kind of agency here, sneaking in moments of solitude or whispered plotting without being surveilled. Historians still debate how structured this time was. Was it truly freeform, or were there unspoken rules? Did people feel guilt over being awake? Some journals suggest a gentle rhythm. Wake, reflect, maybe converse, then sleep again. Others imply a more intentional approach. One diarist even described their nightly ritual as a second day, gentle and secret. That's poetic and slightly dramatic, but isn't it nice to think of? You shift slightly in your bed, adjusting the pillow. A thin, feather, stuffed rectangle that's already starting to flatten. You feel a little ache in your hip from the uneven straw stuffing beneath the sheet. But still, you're warm, you're safe. And outside, the city remains mostly still. A baker lights their oven. The distant clink of iron tools signals someone starting their day early. But for you, this isn't morning. Not yet. Others in the city are still wide-eyed. Some are embroidering by low light, others sharpening razors, mending shoes, feeding infants, or just lying in silence, soaking in that peculiar peace only found in the middle of the night. You too? Begin to feel it. The shift, your body cooling again, your limbs heavier, your mind slowing. Second sleep approaches. But not quite yet. There's still time for one last glance at the dimly glowing coals, a small yawn, and maybe a whispered word to whoever's beside you, or to no one at all. Then, like a curtain being drawn gently over the mind, the in between hour dissolves. You roll over, your breath deepens, and slowly, seamlessly, you sink back into the deeper stretch of the night. The second sleep settles over you like fog slipping back into the sign. There's no mental gymnastics required, no willpower summoned. Your body knows what to do. This is the natural rhythm. A return, not a restart. And this stretch of slumber, it's different, deeper, stranger, dreamier. If first sleep is for restoration, second sleep is for wandering. Your limbs are warm now, your mind already a few steps ahead, drifting toward scenes that flicker like candlelight in wind. A familiar face appears, then a doorway you've never seen. Then you're in a garden that might be Versailles, or your neighbor's cabbage patch, but lit like heaven. Historians and sleep researchers, many of whom stumbled on this pattern accidentally in old journals and court records, have noted how people describe second sleep dreams as longer, more elaborate, and somehow looser, less grounded, more philosophical, or, to put it plainly, weirder. In 18th century Paris, second sleep was the realm of poets and mystics. People believed the veil between waking and dreaming thinned here. Some swore second sleep let them commune with the dead. Others claimed to receive divine instruction. A few ambitious thinkers even tried to control their second sleep dreams by focusing on specific thoughts during the waking interlude, an early, candle-lit form of lucid dreaming. A merchant in the Latin Quarter once claimed he solved a tax dispute in a second sleep dream. He woke at dawn, did the math, and sure enough, his subconscious nailed it. Was that sleep inspiration or just sheer luck? Historians still argue whether second sleep sharpened cognition or merely gave the illusion of clarity. What we do know is this people relied on it, not just for rest, but for meaning. This second stretch was long, often 3, even 4 hours, and Parisians counted on it to carry them gently toward the sunrise. Meanwhile, the city changes again. The hush of the midnight hour gives way to a faint, rhythmic stirring. Distant footsteps echo along cobblestones slick with dew. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then stops. And in the distance, the soft, metallic peal of a monastery bell signaling lauds, the early morning prayer. But you don't hear it. You're somewhere else entirely, deep in the slow waves of dream sleep. Your breath is steady. The weight of the day has fully lifted. And still, others around you are mid-slumber too. All across the city, from the banks of the Canal Saint Martin to the mansard, roofed homes of the Faubourg Saint Honoré, Parisians lie wrapped in sheets or cloaks or nothing at all, floating in that same second sea of sleep. Somewhere across the hall, a child murmurs in their sleep, maybe dreaming of pastries, or sword fights, or getting through a math lesson without being caned. You'll never know. In the room above, a widow stirs briefly. A habit, perhaps. Her husband used to cough just about now, but now there's only silence. She rolls over. The memories drift away. Second sleep was sacred. Not necessarily religious, though it often included whispered prayers as people drifted off again. Sacred in the sense of its privacy. This was not performative, not interrupted. No one expected you to wake productive. This was your time. And in a world of dirt, fire, labor, and worry, that meant everything. And of course, in true 18th century fashion, there were also warnings about how not to spend your second sleep. Overindulgence was frowned upon. Avoid excessive slumber past sunrise. One pamphlet warned, for it invites sluggish thought and poor digestion. Another book, a bizarre blend of science and superstition, claimed that sleeping through dawn led to liver wind, which sounds like something that definitely ruins your breakfast. On the other hand, some physicians believed second sleep was where the true healing happened. They urged patients to embrace it fully, to eat lightly the evening before, and to avoid strong drink after first waking. Advice still weirdly relevant today. Quirky fact incoming. Second sleep was often when people remembered the names of things they'd forgotten during the day. One diary notes, I woke after the second rest and knew instantly the baker's son's name was Jean Baptiste. Strange how the mind keeps its secrets. And maybe that's the heart of it. Second sleep wasn't just about resting, it was about remembering, repairing, wandering. It was a soft space carved out in the rigid stone frame of daily life. Today, we call segmented sleep a disorder. Back then, it was just Tuesday. And for now, you're still deep in it. No plans. No alarms. No guilt about snoozing through sunrise. Just that final, delicious descent into weightlessness. As the city begins to stretch and yawn and light creeps across the rooftops, you'll wake soon. But not yet. The rooster doesn't crow yet. The sky, smeared with hints of indigo, still belongs to the sleepers. You're somewhere near the tail end of second sleep now, snuggled under your blanket, limbs warm and mind slack, while the earliest stirrings of the city begin without you. But here's the thing. Paris wasn't alone in this curious habit of sleeping twice. This wasn't some odd, city-specific eccentricity like powdered wigs or arguing about cheese. No, segmented sleep was everywhere. From the countryside of rural England to the narrow alleys of Naples, from Spanish convents to Puritan New England. Records show that millions of people followed the same nightly rhythm. First sleep, wakeful pause. Second sleep, It was practically universal. You could be a farmer in Kent, rising from your straw mattress to check the hearth or poke at a noisy pig. You might be a Venetian merchant scribbling trade numbers under flickering lamp oil, or a colonial woman in Massachusetts, whispering midnight prayers as a frost-laced window sighs. All of them connected by this quiet choreography of sleep. What's wild is how thoroughly this sleep pattern wove itself into cultural norms. In England, people called the interlude watching, while Germans had terms like Nachtwache. Even French legal documents from the 1700s reference the hours between first and second sleep as a recognized time slot. Imagine the modern legal system making room for that. Court will reconvene after your 2 a.m. cocoa. The pattern also slipped into stories, folk songs, and even jokes. One 17th century English ballad references a man who, during his watchful hour, found the cat had taken his stew. And yes, that somehow passed for humor back then. Historians still debate the true origins of biphasic sleep. Was it born from biology, our natural circadian rhythms responding to darkness? Or was it a cultural adaptation to life without artificial light? Before gas lamps and light bulbs, the night was long. Sunset could mean 500 p.m. and sunrise 700 a.m. That's 14 hours of dark, and most people wouldn't, or didn't want to sleep straight through. So instead, they split the difference. In colder climates, the pattern became even more pronounced. Scandinavian communities built it into their winter routine. Monks, especially, formalized it. Monastic schedules often included night prayers, matins or vigils, sandwiched right between the two sleeps. In those long hours, faith and fatigue danced their own strange duet. The Americas followed suit. Settlers in New England often wrote of their first sleeping in letters back home. Some journals even mention dreams had betwixt sleeps as sources of spiritual reflection. And Native American traditions, while varied, include accounts of night waking, sometimes as ritual, sometimes for storytelling. The in-between time wasn't something to be feared or fixed. It was just time. A quirky detail here, in some Mediterranean towns, folks took the second sleep so seriously they'd plan evening visits around it. Stay till first sleep? They'd say at dinner. Meanings you're welcome, but don't overstay your welcome. Unless, of course, you were bringing wine, then exceptions could be made. This practice wasn't limited to the poor or rural, either. Urban elites also described waking between sleeps, albeit in slightly fancier beds. In Florence, one aristocrat described pacing his library with a robe and a glass of warm milk, reading Aristotle by lamplight while waiting for sleep's return. The man had options, and still, second sleep was a given. All this might leave you wondering, what happened? Why don't we sleep like this anymore? The answer's coming soon, but for now, you stretch again beneath your blanket, second sleep drawing to a close. The sky behind the curtains has gone from ink, black to navy, edging toward dawn's gray bloom. Somewhere a servant coughs, a baker's oven belches smoke. A wooden cart rumbles past with milk sloshing in clay jars. And still, across the world of 1750, others like you linger in bed, soaking in those last few minutes of segmented sleep. They're in barns, lofts, palaces, cloisters, yurts. All of them joined in a rhythm we've mostly forgotten. It was a different kind of night back then. Longer, slower, full of pause and space and silence. There was no need to hack your sleep schedule or download a meditation app. You just lived in time. And time, in turn, made space for rest. So before you rise, before the city pulls you fully awake, savor this. You're part of something ancient, something strangely universal. A pattern older than Paris, wider than the sign, and deeper than we ever gave it credit for. The faint light bleeding through your shutters now hints at the coming day, but let's not rise just yet. Stay tucked in for a while longer, because now it's time to ask the question that's probably been creeping in. Why did people sleep this way? Why 2 sleeps instead of one glorious 8-hour marathon of uninterrupted slumber? Why the midnight pause? The break in the rhythm? The quiet wakefulness? To answer that, we need to zoom in, not just on behavior, but biology. Turns out your brain is actually kind of wired for it. In total darkness, without electric light or glowing screens, the human body's natural circadian rhythm stretches a little beyond 24 hours. When pre-industrial people were left to their own devices, especially in winter months with extra long nights, they tended to fall into biphasic sleep naturally. We know this because modern sleep studies tried it. In one, participants were kept on natural light cycles for several weeks, and most began spontaneously waking for an hour or two in the night. So yes, it's biological. When your day ends at sundown and there's little to do but sit by a fire, your body slips into this ancient rhythm. First sleep, wakefulness. Second sleep, no alarms, no melatonin gummies, no blue light filters needed. But biology is just one part of the story. The other, culture. Society made it normal, expected, even celebrated. Pre-industrial life was shaped by the sun and the seasons. People got up early, really early, to milk cows, bake bread, haul goods to market. They worked hard, ate heartily, and went to bed not long after dark. There wasn't much nightlife, unless you counted dodging rats or hearing your neighbor snore. The long nights of autumn and winter especially made segmented sleep more practical. 14 hours of darkness. Try sleeping through that in one go without some kind of interruption. And here's where things get interesting. The in between time wasn't seen as a flaw. It was embraced. It had a name. It had rituals. It was productive, even sacred. The concept of unbroken sleep as ideal. That's a very modern idea. Now, if you're picturing everyone cheerfully adjusting to this rhythm, hold your horses. It wasn't all cozy fireside chats and midnight musings. The pattern was more a result of necessity than luxury. Candles were expensive. Oil lamps too. Most homes couldn't afford to keep a bright light burning all night, so sleep filled the long hours as affordably as possible. In fact, the average person in 1700s, Paris might only have 2 or 3 candles for an entire week. You don't waste that on insomnia. Let's sprinkle in a fringe theory for good measure. Some early scholars believed first and second sleep matched the body's internal balance of hot and cold humors. First sleep cooled the body, second sleep warmed it. This, they claimed, helped prevent brain fevers and melancholy vapors. While obviously nonsense by modern medical standards, it shows how deeply people tried to make sense of their nights. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was truly universal or just common among certain groups, urban versus rural, rich versus poor. Some insist that laborers who worked grueling hours may have skipped the pattern altogether, collapsing into one deep, unbroken sleep out of sheer exhaustion. But plenty of evidence, diaries, manuals, court testimonies, suggests biphasic sleep was widespread. And let's not ignore the practical perks of breaking up the night. It let you check on your home, stoke the fire, guard against thieves. In Paris, a bustling city with its fair share of pickpockets and lurking mischief, those in between hours were a good time to peek out a window and make sure your boots hadn't walked off on their own. There's even evidence that this rhythm shaped social structures. Markets adjusted their hours. Churches timed their early services to follow second sleep, and curfews, they weren't always about keeping people in. Sometimes they were about managing when people woke up and moved around. Here's a fun tidbit. Some innkeepers would rent out beds by the sleep. First sleep patrons would come early, leave after midnight, and then second sleep guests would shuffle until dawn. It was basically Airbnb, but for naps. And the sleep patterns extended beyond humans. Livestock routines, meal prep, even public sanitation sometimes mirrored this schedule. A cleaner might sweep alleyways after midnight while most residents were mid-watch. Not quite a graveyard shift, but a very groggy predecessor. What killed all this? Don't worry, we'll get to that. But for now, know this: for centuries, segmented sleep was not a quirk. It was a fact of life, as common as bread and just as vital. And now, as dawn stains the sky pink and gold, you stir once more. The second sleep is ending. Outside, carts creak over cobblestones. Someone calls out to a neighbor. The city is waking, this time for good. But part of you might miss the in between. That quiet slice of midnight peace when the world held its breath and sleep made room for dreams, thoughts, secrets, and sighs. The sun's golden fingers reach over the rooftops now, tracing lines of light along frost-tipped gutters. You sit up, stretch, and breathe in the first real morning air. It smells faintly of soot, bread, and whatever your upstairs neighbor was cooking with cabbage last night. And today feels a little different. Because this morning, something subtle has shifted. This might be the century, maybe even the decade, where your two sleeps start to merge. Not because your body has changed, but because the world around you has. Let's talk about how that ancient rhythm broke. Spoiler alert, it wasn't one thing. It was everything. The culprit most often blamed. Artificial light, not the flickering candle or the smoky oil lamp. No, we're talking about gaslight. The city, transforming, schedule, shattering invention that turned night into day. Paris first lit its streets with gas in the early 1800s. Soon after, entire neighborhoods could wander after dark without bumping into carts or stepping into horse manure. Magical, right? But with light came change. Shopkeepers stayed open later. Taverns extended hours. Theaters began their plays at 8 p.m. instead of 5. Suddenly, night wasn't for winding down. It was for doing. You, as a typical Parisian, might stay up later now. Maybe you read longer, eat supper at 9, or go for a walk after dusk, just because you can. And guess what? Your bedtime gets pushed back, which means first sleep might not start until close to midnight. And by then, there's no time for an interlude. You've got to be up early. Church bells still ring. Bakers still bake. So you start sleeping straight through. Welcome to modernity. Of course, gaslight didn't hit every home at once. It began in city centers, moving out slowly. But its influence spread fast. The idea that you could control your night, that darkness itself was optional, changed everything. And it wasn't just light. The Industrial Revolution came crashing in, bringing schedules, shifts, and noise. Factories didn't care if your body preferred 2 sleeps. You worked when the whistle blew. Sleep became utilitarian. Clocked in. Clocked out. 8 hours if you were lucky. Less if you weren't. Historians still argue whether this was a revolution or a theft. Did electric and gaslight free us from the tyranny of the dark, or rob us of something ancient and human? There's no consensus. But one thing's certain, once the clock started running the world, segmented sleep started to vanish. And not without resistance. Old habits die hard. For decades, doctors and priests warned against sleeping, without pause. One physician lamented in 1836 that patients forced themselves to slumber without reflection or respite, calling it unnatural and potentially dangerous. He recommended a brief wakeful hour around midnight, preferably spent reading psalms. But as cities brightened and nights shrank, the warnings faded. By the late 19th century, references to first sleep and second sleep nearly vanished from literature. The silence is telling. Something that was once assumed, expected, lived, simply disappears. Even in Paris, the city of sleep, watching romance and chamber pot interludes, the rhythm changed. Theaters ran past midnight. Cafes spilled out into cobbled streets. Early newspapers praised the new city that never sleeps. Sound familiar? Yet traces of the old ways lingered. Elderly folks kept the habit. Farmers, especially, who still rose with the sun and went to bed with the chickens. In monasteries, the split sleep routine clung on, preserved in stone walls and incense haze. And in some homes, especially poorer ones without gas or electric lighting, the 2 sleeps survived into the 20th century, quietly, without fanfare, like a candle kept burning out of stubbornness. Here's a quirky little detail during World War I. Some soldiers in trench camps reverted naturally to segmented sleep patterns. The quiet between midnight and early dawn became a rare moment of peace. Letters from the front mention this return, as if the body, despite everything, remembered. But back in civilian Paris, sleep was marching forward. One long stretch, one pillow, one dawn. The age of the midnight interlude was over. Or was it? Today, sleep scientists have rediscovered segmented sleep, buried in dusty archives and forgotten diaries. And guess what? They're intrigued. Some even suggest we might do better with it. Studies show people who wake naturally in the night, without panic, without screens, often feel more rested, more mentally agile. Maybe our ancestors weren't weird. Maybe they were onto something. Still, in the 18th century, you wouldn't be having this conversation. Your sleep wasn't a strategy or optimized. It was simply how life moved. So now, as the light grows and the second sleep fades, you stand, stretch again, and blink. You don't know it yet, but you've lived through one of the last generations to sleep like this. To rise in the night and not feel broken. To drift between sleeps without shame. The world is waking, reshaping, re-timing itself. And you, groggy, yawning, feet bare on cold wood, are stepping out of a dream, both literal and historical. You rub your eyes and feel the last fragments of dream dissolve like mist. The fire has gone completely cold, the room smells faintly of ash and wool, and outside, the rooftops are tinged with the first sharp gold of morning light. But before you toss off the blanket and face the day, let's take a detour into the weirder, sleepier corners of 18th century medicine. Because let's be real, if there's one thing people have always tried to mess with, it's sleep. They wanted to fix it, improve it, analyze it, and yes, monetize it. Sound familiar? Enter the doctors, the dream theorists, and the unsolicited midnight advice givers. Back then, Paris was a city overflowing with apothecaries, herbalists, and physicians. Some with degrees, some with just a really convincing mustache. All of them had opinions about how and why you should sleep. Most agreed on the basic rhythm of first and second sleep, but after that, it was a free for all. Start with the basics. Many believed that sleep was governed by the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much bile, bad dreams. Too much phlegm, you'd sleep too long and become gloomy of spirit. Their solution: a lot of terrifying sounding herbal tonics and, if you were really unlucky, leeches. And if you struggled to fall asleep between the two phases, there was advice for that, too. One medical guide from 1749 suggests drinking a warming cordial made from wine, honey, and powdered nutmeg. Another says to lay with one's left nostril downwind of the hearth. Not entirely sure how effective that was, but hey, people were trying. Now, on the dream side of things get spicier. Dream interpretation was huge. People wrote books, actual books, cataloging what various dreams meant. Dreaming of a chicken, financial success, falling into a river, time to renew your church attendance. One Parisian priest warned that dreaming of cheese foretold moral laxity. So honestly, same quirky fact, some Parisians kept dream journals specifically for second sleep. They believed these dreams were more truthful, more clear, souled. A washerwoman might write about a dream where her deceased grandmother gave her advice. A merchant might wake convinced he had seen next week's lottery numbers. And while most dreams faded like soap bubbles, a few clung, whispered about at market stalls, and whispered across kitchen tables. Historians still argue whether this dream obsession was religious, psychological, or just a way to pass the time when you couldn't afford newspapers. Probably a mix of all three. But let's not forget the more dramatic sleep solutions. There were powders and potions, of course. Valerian root, chamomile, lavender sachets tucked under pillows. These are still around. But also, cordial pearls, made of crushed oyster shell, thought to calm the nerves and soothe the marrow. And then there was the always popular opiate tincture, essentially early stage NyQuil, but with far more addiction. You also had spiritual advice. Priests and monks advised midnight prayers during the wakeful hour, not just to stay virtuous, but because demons, allegedly, were busiest around 3 a.m. One 18th century Parisian friar wrote that a soul left idle between sleeps is a chamber door open to temptation. He didn't specify what kind of temptation, but we're guessing it was the kind that involved warm bread and stolen kisses. And yet, despite all this advice, sleep remained deeply personal. Some people swore by fresh air before bed. Others insisted on foot baths. Some families even rotated sleeping spots to rebalance energies. One aristocratic family in Versailles reportedly arranged their beds in accordance with astrology charts. Taurus rising. Time to face north. Meanwhile, those in less gilded surroundings had their own systems. City workers with brutal hours sometimes collapsed right after supper and skipped the whole wakeful hour out of necessity. Others used that time to steal back moments for themselves. Moments that weren't owned by a boss, a church, or a schedule. There's something touching about that. The idea that in a world still dictated by sun and shadow, the middle of the night could become your own. And while the doctors tried their best, most people figured out what worked simply by listening to their bodies. Maybe you woke up for an hour. Maybe you didn't. Maybe your second sleep was full of dreams. Maybe it wasn't. The important part was this: no one called it broken. No one diagnosed it. It was just how things were. So now, as you swing your legs out of bed and feel the cold wood underfoot, you might remember some of those oddball cures and curious habits. Maybe you're grateful you don't need to sniff thyme oil or dangle raw garlic from your bedpost. Or maybe, just maybe, you're wondering if there was something beautifully simple about a time when sleep came in two parts, and no one tried to hack it. Your feet touched the floor and you went slightly. Cold. Always cold. The fire's nothing but pale ash, and the sun, though technically present, isn't doing much to warm things up. But as you shuffle toward the window and ease open a shutter, Paris opens up before you like a sleepy cat stretching after a long nap. This is morning in the 18th century city, and it looks nothing like the chaos of our modern dawn. There are no blaring horns, no iPhone alarms buzzing in every apartment. Instead, the street below hums with quiet motion, a cart rattles by with fresh milk, a pair of washerwomen chatter softly as they pass with heavy baskets, and someone in the building across the way is lighting their first candle of the day. But the city wasn't always this gentle. Especially not after dark. Let's rewind a bit, back to the middle of the night when you might have stirred during your sleep pause. You glanced outside then, too, and what did you see? Nothing. Or at least not much. That's because nighttime in 18th century Paris was a different animal altogether. Not dead, not empty, but regulated, and often kind of scary. Nighttime had rules, lots of them. By royal decree, Paris operated under a curfew for most of the century. Ordinary citizens weren't supposed to be out late without a really good reason, and ideally, a lantern in hand. No lantern. Trouble. Lantern laws were taken surprisingly seriously. The goal: discourage crime and keep people from wandering drunk into the sign. Night watchmen patrolled neighborhoods, carrying halberds and shouting the hour. "It's midnight and all's well!" they'd call, partly as reassurance, partly to scare off would-be thieves. If you were awake during your watchful hour and heard them call out, you might smile, roll over, and feel oddly safe, or oddly annoyed, depending on how cold the floorboards were. But those guards weren't always enough. Criminals loved the dark. Paris had more than its fair share of rogues, pickpockets, burglars, and the occasional saboteur. Some operated in packs. Others posed as priests or city officials, and they knew just when to strike during those precious, vulnerable hours when a city half slept. Hence, people took their own precautions. Heavy locks, iron bolts, strategic piles of furniture. It was common to hear about households that left loud pots or loose wood near entry points as makeshift alarms. The darkness was also used to settle scores. Feuds between families or rival tradesmen sometimes flared up after dusk, far from the watchful eyes of guild officials or priests. More than one accidental fall into the sign was quietly discussed at local bakeries as something more sinister. Historians still argue whether the level of night crime was exaggerated by moral panics or genuinely pervasive. Some argue that the rise of published police records in the 1700s simply made crime more visible, not necessarily more common. But whatever the truth, people were afraid of the dark for more than just the ghosts. And yet, for all the fear and formality, night in Paris could be weirdly beautiful. The lanterns, those that were lit, glowed warm gold, reflected in puddles, trembled in frost. The alleys seemed to whisper rather than echo, and the river, always just out of sight, sounded like silk being pulled slowly through water. You'd sometimes hear music. A violin, a voice humming something mournful, someone stumbling home from a tavern with a belly full of wine and a head full of verses. The city didn't sleep so much as recline, one eye open, waiting. Back inside your building, things were quiet but never entirely still. Someone might rise to add coal to the brazier. A baby might cry. And yes, someone might slip downstairs for a secret rendezvous. Let's not pretend everyone stayed chaste just because the sun was down. Curiously, the Parisian police often recorded complaints about noise during the watch, singing, dancing, even political debate, all apparently a bit too spirited for the hours between sleeps. But that didn't stop anyone. Quirky fact for your sleepy brain: some night watch reports included notes on odd occurrences. One mentions a man preaching loudly to invisible listeners near Pont Neuf. Another details a goat perched atop a cart for no reason, stubborn and screaming. Sleep in 18th century Paris. Never boring. And here's something else. Night had class implications. The rich could afford light, warmth, space. They could afford to be awake and comfortable between sleeps. The poor, not so much. Many shared rooms, even beds. Privacy was a luxury. So was silence, which meant the midnight hour wasn't just about solitude. It was a rare chance for autonomy. You stand now, warming your hands near the dying hearth. The night is past, the risks with it, and yet in some small way you'll miss it. The silence, the low hum, the flicker of candlelight against a sleeping city's skin. The rules may have kept you in bed, but your dreams, your thoughts, your quiet wakefulness, they went where they pleased. You press your feet into your slippers, if you're lucky enough to have them, and shuffle across the cold floor toward the wash basin. The room's pale light reveals the humble sprawl of your sleeping space, a mattress stuffed with straw or wool, a rough linen sheet, a blanket that's heavy but never quite warm enough. This is 18th century comfort, which, let's be honest, is mostly just not terrible. Let's talk about where and how Parisians slept during the heyday of the sleep era. Because while the rhythm of sleep might have been natural, the arrangements were often anything but restful. Start with the furniture. The classic Parisian bed in this era was not our plush, king-size cloud of memory foam. It was a sturdy frame, often wood, occasionally iron, with a sagging base made from ropes or leather strips. These needed tightening every so often, which is where we get the phrase, sleep tight. If you didn't, you'd sag into the middle like a bowl of human pudding. The mattress. Not much better. Most were filled with straw, feathers, wool, or even sea moss, depending on budget and what you could pilfer from nature. Feather beds were fancy. Straw was common. And sea moss? Let's just say it didn't smell like lavender. Now, were beds private? Not usually. Most working-class Parisians shared. A bed might host a married couple, a child or two, maybe a grandmother, and sometimes a paying lodger. Privacy was rare, and if you were a servant, you might sleep on a trundle bed shoved beneath the main one, or on a bench, or curled up beside the hearth like the family dog. Minus the cuddles. Historians still argue whether this closeness bred affection, or just mutual annoyance. Probably both, but there's something undeniably communal about the way sleep happened back then. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't treated like a medical procedure or a productivity tool. It was life, messy, shared, human, and noisy. Good grief, the snoring. One diarist in 1775 complained of a neighbor whose nasal trumpetings could rattle pewter. Another described a cousin who grunted and whistled like a boiling kettle, with no white noise machines, no earplugs, and no separate bedrooms for most people. You learned to either live with it or passive, aggressively elbow your bedmate. Let's not forget the critters. Fleas, bedbugs, mice, sometimes rats. Even the cleanest home might have a few unwanted bedfellows. One noblewoman, famed for her beauty, once awoke to find a mouse curled on her pillow. Her solution: she trained a cat to sleep on her chest. Problem solved. Sort of. You might also sleep in the bed or on it, depending on the season. In summer, many Parisians simply laid a blanket on top and slept uncovered, swatting at mosquitoes and praying for a breeze. In winter, you piled on every textile you owned. If you were wealthy, that might include fur or velvet. If you weren't, it meant old coats and wool socks layered until you resembled a shivering armadillo. Now, a quirky detail: curtain beds. These were 4-poster beds with thick drapes you could pull around yourself, not just for fancy folks, either. Modest homes often had one. Why? Because Paris was drafty. Stone buildings plus minimal insulation meant winters were brutal. Curtains kept heat in and noise out. They also provided a smidgen of privacy in rooms that doubled as kitchens, parlors, nurseries, and whatever else needed to happen indoors. Some even believed curtain beds had spiritual protection properties. Close the drapes, and the devil couldn't get in. I mean, if it works for mosquitoes, why not malevolent forces? And while we're being thorough, let's talk sleepwear. Think less Victorian nightgown, and more whatever's clean-ish. Most people slept in shifts they'd worn during the day. Maybe a linen shirt, maybe nothing at all. Nightcaps were a thing, though, worn to trap heat. Yes, even the long floppy kind. They weren't just for cartoons. Oddly, pillows weren't universally adored. Some people swore they hurt their necks. Others stacked them high like a noble tower of fluff. One Parisian clerk bragged that his pillow was stuffed with virgin duck down. Which, wow, that's a branding move if I've ever heard one. Sleeping arrangements also reflected rank. The wealthiest had ornate canopy beds, embroidered linens, silk sheets. Servants changed them daily. The poorest might sleep on straw piles in shared attics, curled beside pots of coals, their dreams mixed with smoke and snoring. And children, they were often bundled into bed early, squeezed into corners, or stacked like logs. One amusing record describes 5 siblings crammed into a bed, like salted fish. Sounds awful, but also kind of adorable. So now, back in your Parisian room, as you tug your blanket tight and stretch your toes toward warmth, maybe you realize something: sleep has always been a little ridiculous, a little awkward, a little human. But somehow, despite the lumpy straw, the sibling snoring, and the lurking bedbugs, people still dreamed, still rested, still rose ready to face whatever strange, beautiful nonsense the city had in store. You're dressed now, sort of. Shirt loosely buttoned, trousers pulled on over chilled legs, and maybe a coat thrown over your shoulders if the cold bites too hard. The city outside your shutters is stretching, yawning, shaking off the night, but not everyone in Paris slept peacefully between first and second dreams. Some never slept at all. Let's talk about what happened in the dark, when crime crept where light could not follow, and why the city took it so seriously that it built an entire ecosystem around the enforcement of curfews and lantern laws. First, the basics. Curfew wasn't a suggestion in 18th century Paris. It was the law. Most citizens were required to be indoors by a certain hour, typically around 10 p.m. Unless they had a specific reason to be out, and a lit lantern to prove it. The phrase, "no lantern, no liberty," wasn't official, but it might as well have been. Why so strict? Simple. Paris was a city of shadows, narrow alleys, blind corners, and opportunists. It didn't help that the streets were cobbled but poorly maintained, the lighting uneven, and the neighborhoods, especially the poorer ones, densely packed and hard to patrol. The city's response? Night guards. A lot of them. These men weren't just watching out for roadie drunks or sleepy bakers. They were actively trying to suppress theft, assault, smuggling, and sometimes outright rebellion. The guards were usually armed with halberds, wore heavy cloaks, and carried lanterns of their own. They walked in pairs or groups, calling out the time, but also checking lanterns and asking questions if someone looked suspicious. Historians still argue whether these patrols were genuinely effective or mostly theatrical. Some say their presence deterred petty crime. Others suggest they mostly annoyed honest citizens who forgot to carry a lantern or were out fetching a midwife. And yes, the lantern law was very real. If you walked at night without your own light, you could be fined or arrested. Even worse, you could be mistaken for a criminal. Lanterns didn't just help you see. They signaled that you belonged in the night, that you had purpose. Without one, you were suspect by default. Lanterns themselves came in all shapes. Iron frame glass boxes with handles were common. Some wealthy folks had more ornate versions, brass trim, colored panes, little carved flourishes. But most people used something simple, practical, and stained. Still, lanterns couldn't solve everything. Crime flourished in the dark. Pickpockets were everywhere. Alley robbers worked in pairs. One to distract, the other to lift your purse. Some posed as beggars, others as clergy. One notorious thief, dubbed Lemoyne Gris, the Grey Monk, dressed in stolen robes and offered to bless people, while his accomplice relieved them of their valuables. There were also roof crawlers. Yes, a real thing. Thieves who climbed up gutters and across rooftops to slip into unlocked windows. People locked their doors, but windows. Often just a wooden shutter. And not all crimes were of the wallet, snatching variety. Domestic disputes could turn deadly after sundown. Drunken brawls spilled out of taverns, even quiet vendettas. Grudges over land, love, or family shame found violent resolution in the anonymity of night. The city tried to keep things civilized, but in the dark, civility was optional. Which brings us to the more regulated side of things, law enforcement. The Lieutenant Général de Police in Paris oversaw a surprisingly complex system by the 1700s. Officers kept records, filed reports, interviewed witnesses. It was more CSI than you'd expect. But with slow communication and limited forensic science, read no forensics at all, they had to rely on patrols, informants, and a deep understanding of local gossip. Quirky tidbit, some citizens volunteered as part-time night watchers in exchange for tax breaks or favors. These amateur guards were often terrible at the job, falling asleep, drinking on duty, or hiding when things got sketchy. But the city welcomed any help it could get. And despite all this structure, people still tried to live. Some broke curfew for honest reasons, to fetch a midwife, to help a sick neighbor, to meet a lover at a discreet hour. One diary recounts a baker sneaking out nightly to feed stray dogs because he could not bear their crying. He carried a lantern. The guards knew. They let him pass. Others weren't so lucky. Records show plenty of people arrested for being out too late, or with no lantern, or for looking suspicious. One poor man spent a night in jail simply because his candle blew out and he couldn't relight it. That's the kind of logistical problem you don't see in modern crime dramas. All this meant that, for many Parisians, the hours between sleeps weren't just private, they were protected. You didn't go out unless you had to. And if you did, you moved quietly, cautiously, perhaps with your heart hammering beneath layers of wool and fear. Now, as daylight chases away the last shadows, the streets become friendlier again. Guards vanish, lanterns are extinguished, and the people, cautious, curious, or rebellious, emerge once more. Still, part of you remembers that under the cobblestones, under the order, the city keeps its secrets. Paris is never fully asleep, and its darker half never fully gone. You step outside now, wrapped in layers and squinting at the pale sunlight glancing off slate rooftops. The air smells of wood smoke, fresh bread, and somewhere, hot chocolate. The sounds are soft but rising. Wheelbarrows creak, shutters bang open, and street sweepers slap their brushes along stone. But not everyone has just woken up. In fact, some Parisians never went to bed at all. Let's drift through the other side of the city's sleep story. Those rare but fascinating individuals who didn't follow the first and second sleep script. The cafes that stayed open, the taverns that never truly emptied, the poets, gamblers, and insomniacs who lived outside the rhythms of the rest. Start with the cafes. By the mid-18th century, Paris was scattered with small, smoky coffeehouses, some modest, others elaborate. Many closed at night, sure, but a few stayed open deep into the small hours, catering to a clientele that wasn't quite ready for dreams. Inside one, you'd find flickering candlelight bouncing off brass fixtures and marble-top tables. The smell of strong coffee, boiled black, thick as tar, mingled with tobacco smoke and the occasional whiff of perfume. Patrons sat hunched over chessboards, newspapers, pamphlets. Some debated philosophy. Others just watched. These weren't places of riotous laughter or clinking glasses. They were quiet, focused, sleepy, but somehow defiant. A way to say, no thank you to the expected rhythm of 2 sleeps. Then there were the taverns. Now these were louder, earthier, lit with smoky oil lamps, floors sticky with spilled wine, and filled with people who either had too much energy or too little reason to go home. Sailors, apprentices, the occasional pickpocket, plus poets and dreamers and couples who couldn't wait until morning. Taverns were warmth and noise and salt. Dried meats hung above the bar. Dice clacked in corners. Someone played a fiddle, always slightly out of tune. And if you sat in the back, maybe you'd overhear a whispered plan or a secret rendezvous. Not everyone drank to forget. Some drank to remember. Especially between sleeps. A quirky tidbit here. One particular cafe on the left bank claimed to serve restorative chocolate, specifically for the wakeful hours, mixed with cinnamon, sugar, and just a dash of something stronger. It was marketed as a balm for midnight minds. Whether it worked or just tasted like spiced regret is anyone's guess. Now, not all night owls were there by choice. Some worked. City maintenance crews often cleaned streets during the quietest hours. Delivery boys snuck through alleys before the dawn rush. Couriers, physicians, even messengers for royal officials kept odd hours, darting across cobblestones with oil-lit lanterns swinging in time with their footsteps. Historians still argue whether these late night venues and jobs influenced the decline of segmented sleep, or if they were just exceptions. What's certain is that by the late 1700s, more Parisians were stretching their evenings, maybe not fully ditching the 2-sleep rhythm, but bending it, molding it to fit a busier, more connected life. Artists, of course, were notorious for ignoring sleep altogether. Many wrote or painted during the watchful hour. One poet claimed he could hear the muse more clearly when the city whispered rather than roared. Another artist painted only by candlelight, believing it made his colors more honest. Were they just eccentric? Probably. Were they onto something? Possibly. Then there were the insomniacs. Even in an age where segmented sleep was normal, some people simply couldn't rest. They wrote about it. Long, rambling diary entries filled with anxious thoughts, unfinished prayers, half-baked ideas. One woman documented her nightly wakefulness with such obsessive precision that historians now consider her the accidental founder of modern sleep journaling. But here's where it gets really interesting. Not everyone who stayed up between sleeps felt alone. There was a quiet solidarity among the wakeful. Letters from the era mentioned looking out and seeing other windows glowing faintly. Not many, just a few. Enough to feel connected, as if the city breathed with you, quietly acknowledging that not every dream needs darkness. You pass one such cafe now. The shutters are swinging open. A tired man inside sweeps the floor. Another sips the last of his chocolate, eyes bloodshot, but smiling. They've been up all night, maybe playing cards, maybe talking about revolution, or just sitting in that warm hush that comes before day. And now, as the city truly wakes, these nocturnal souls will vanish, back into beds, or off to jobs, or deeper into the alleys of thought. But they were there, every night. The ones who didn't sleep between sleeps, the ones who found meaning, magic, or mischief in the hour everyone else forgot. You glance back once more before heading home. There's something comforting about it, isn't there? Knowing that even in a world that slept in shifts, there were always a few flickering lights, soft, stubborn, and very much awake. Now the sun is truly up, no longer shy at the edge of rooftops, but rising bold and gold over the chimneys, casting shadows across hanging laundry and pigeons picking through crumbs. Paris is stirring in earnest. You can hear it in the crisp clatter of hooves, the creak of shutters opening, and the faint harmonics of 100 yawns. You, along with the rest of this drowsy city, are emerging from the second sleep, blinking against the light, and thinking about how the day is supposed to begin. But have you ever wondered, what did waking up actually look like back then? Forget your iPhone alarm and snooze button. The 18th century Parisian wake-up call was a multi-sensory affair, part ritual, part necessity, and very much dictated by your station in life. Let's start with the sounds. The city didn't exactly have a central alarm clock, but it had plenty of sonic cues. Church bells rang out the hour, again and again. The earliest tolling often marked lauds, the morning prayer. Even if you didn't particularly care about scripture, those bells meant it was time to move. Roosters added their squawk to the mix, followed shortly by the low thunder of carts on cobblestone, the sharp clack of wooden, soled shoes, and someone yelling about fresh bread. If you were lucky enough to live near a baker or a tavern, the smells would get you before the sounds did. Yesti dough. Boiled coffee. Something suspiciously meaty. Waking up in Paris was a full, unatmospheric event. But not everyone greeted the morning the same way. For the working class, mornings were about speed and survival. You got up, dressed fast, maybe tossed cold water on your face from a chipped basin, and were out the door before your stomach had even decided what it wanted. Breakfast was a crust of bread, maybe dipped in broth, or, on a good day, spread with a bit of jam. Water wasn't always safe to drink. So many Parisians started their day with a warm liquid that wasn't exactly hydrating: weak wine, beer, or café au lait made with more milk than coffee. Children drank watered, down wine without blinking. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about practicality. In wealthier homes, mornings moved more slowly. Servants stirred first, lighting fires, drawing bathwater, setting out clothes. The lady of the house might rise mid-morning and take her chocolate in bed. That's not slang. Drinking hot chocolate in bed was genuinely fashionable. Thick, dark, served with cream and sometimes cinnamon. Honestly, not a bad way to start your day. But even the elite had rituals. Some performed morning prayers, others journaled. One nobleman wrote that he always began his day with a poem, not reading one, but writing one. Most were terrible. But it was the 1700s, and self-delusion was still considered charming. And what about the kids? Well, let's just say the morning was not their favorite part of the day. Most children were up early, whether they liked it or not. If you were from a working family, you might already be sweeping a shop, delivering something, or trying to look busy before your tutor arrived. If you were from money, lessons. Always lessons. Math, Latin, religious instruction, and if you were unlucky, music practice. Imagine trying to play the harpsichord before fully waking. Tragic. Clothing was an ordeal. Layer upon layer. Shift, stockings, stays or breeches, wool or linen, depending on the season. You didn't just throw on jeans and a hoodie. Dressing took time, and often help. But even in the fuss and routine, there were shared moments. You might light a candle for better visibility. You might open a window to let in the smell of baking bread. You might nod to your neighbor as they passed, yawning just like you. There's something charming in the idea that, despite the lack of clocks, apps, or fitness trackers, the city found its rhythm together, rising not as individuals, but as a whole. Quirky side note, Paris had knocker, uppers, too, people who were paid to wake others. They'd tap on windows with sticks or toss pebbles until the residents stirred. It's like hiring someone to be your human alarm clock, with slightly more risk of breaking a window. And sometimes, you woke up not to go to work, but to chase something else. A dream, a conversation, a rendezvous. Not all mornings were mundane. Some began with purpose, with nervous excitement, with that flutter of, today might be different. Historians still debate whether waking from segmented sleep made people feel more rested or more sluggish. Some argue the pause at night actually helped the morning feel more grounded. Others think it just dragged everything out unnecessarily. There's no clear consensus. What is clear for a city that slept in stages, mornings were still unified, no matter who you were. Baker, baroness, butcher, bard, you rose with the bells. You blinked into the new day. You washed your face, maybe said a prayer, maybe cursed the cold. And then, you stepped back into the bustle, a small part of something bigger. Paris, the city of night, lanterns and cafe whispers, was now alive in full daylight, but part of you, deep down, maybe still clung to the softness of second sleep. So now you're fully awake, walking cobbled streets dappled with morning sun, passing vendors setting up stalls, horses snorting into their feed bags, and laundresses snapping sheets crisp on lines that flutter between crooked buildings. The city hums, alive, alert, busy. But there's one question, heavy in the corners of your thoughts like the last yawn of a dreams. Were we meant to sleep this way? Let's circle back, slowly, through everything you've felt, heard, and wondered. Because as odd as it might have sounded at first, this habit of sleeping in 2 shifts wasn't an eccentric Parisian invention. It wasn't a fluke. It was a global, natural rhythm. And more scientists today are starting to whisper what 18th century bakers, nuns, and shoemakers always knew deep down. Maybe our modern sleep isn't better. Maybe it's just louder. Today, we're told to aim for a single, unbroken, 8-hour stretch. Anything less? You're failing. Woke up at 3 a.m. Google it and you'll be hit with 47 articles telling you you're stressed, hormonal, or haunted. But what if that mid-night wakefulness is not dysfunction, but a vestige of something older? Something right? Sleep researchers in the last few decades started digging through those old journals, sermons, letters, and what they found was astonishing. First sleep, second sleep, the wakeful pause between them. It wasn't pathology, it was normative, natural, expected. In fact, when modern test subjects were placed in conditions that mimicked pre-industrial environments, no electric lights, long nights, they reverted to the segmented sleep cycle within days. First sleep, wakeful calm. Second sleep, no panic, no sleep aids, just rhythm. Historians still argue over what drove the transition away. Was it gaslight, capitalism, or the rise of factory schedules? Most likely, a cruel mayonnaise to Troyes of all three. When the city extended its productive hours, sleep shrank to fit the gaps. Suddenly, your worth was tied to your efficiency. Waking up in the night wasn't spiritual. It was a liability. But the human body hasn't caught up. Many of us still wake in the night. Maybe you have too. Those moments where you open your eyes at 2:47 a.m. and feel wide awake. Not anxious, just there. And instead of sinking into it, we fret. We reach for a screen. We try to knock ourselves out like we're malfunctioning machines. Maybe we're not malfunctioning. Maybe we're remembering. And the case for 2 sleeps keeps building. Psychologists suggest the inter-sleep period could support creativity, problem solving, even emotional regulation. Anecdotes abound of people solving problems, composing poems, or simply enjoying a sense of quiet clarity in that mysterious pocket of the night. Quirky fact, Benjamin Franklin was a big fan of the night muse. He claimed his best ideas arrived, betwixt sleeps, often scribbled on scraps beside the bed. And he wasn't alone. Artists, saints, revolutionaries, all have left clues pointing back to this ancient cycle. Even now, among shift workers, parents, and the sleepless, remnants of segmented sleep linger. Not out of choice, but necessity. And in their exhaustion, something oddly familiar emerges. A body waking in darkness, a brain refusing to be boxed into one block. So where does that leave you? Maybe you'll try embracing that 3 a.m. wakefulness next time it comes. Not with frustration, but curiosity. Maybe you'll light a candle, read a page, breathe deep. Write down a half-formed idea, or just sit in the dark, listening to the quiet, remembering that people once did this. Not because they were broken, but because they weren't. Maybe the world has changed, but your rhythms, they've been here a long time. And as you walk on now, your feet warming, your eyes still a little puffy, you carry something with you, a sense that time doesn't always move in straight lines. That night can be a friend. That sleep doesn't need to be perfect to be complete. You've lived for a little while in a different kind of night. A slower one, softer, with room for pauses, for whispers, for warmth. You've tasted the sleep of Parisians long gone, and perhaps felt your body exhale in recognition. And now, as the city bursts into the full light of day, you smile. Not because the dream is over, but because maybe it never really ends. And now, the story is done. The city fades, the cobblestones dissolve, and the candle you imagined burning in the corner flickers down to nothing. You're here, in your own room, the noise of the day far behind you, the weight of blanket pressing just right. Let yourself breathe slower now. Your body knows what to do. You've wandered centuries, through quiet alleys, across rooftops, into taverns and beds and silent pauses between sleeps. You've listened to bells toll and watched shadows stretch and learned, just a little, how humans used to rest before the world got loud. Maybe part of you still remembers that rhythm. Maybe you've always remembered it. So as your breath deepens and your limbs grow heavy, imagine yourself in that small curtained bed again. The fire's low. The air is cold, but your blanket is warm. You can hear the city's heartbeat, but it's slowing. Everything is slowing. The light, the thoughts, the stories. There's nothing left to do. Nothing left to chase. Only softness. Only sleep. Let yourself drift now. Dream as if you've done this for hundreds of years. Because maybe you have,